Hi. So I've been cooking a long time, almost 30 years now, and every day I go into work, and I work really hard, and I try and learn something new. And what I've learned at the end of all of this time, with all of this effort, is something that I feel is kind of a universal truth for cooks. And that's that I don't know a goddamn thing about anything. At the end of the day, cooking in a restaurant, even though the passion, the desire for knowledge is fundamental to what it means to be a cook, cooking for customers every day is a very intuitive and a very emotional practice, and you learn what you can, but you can only do so much to carefully study processes. And it was Ferran many years ago who realized that if you physically separate a place where you can study and experiment, a food lab, then what happens is you can greatly accelerate the pace of discovery of new ideas. So a few years ago, Rene and his team, they started a new kind of food lab, something that I think is extraordinarily exciting. It's called the Nordic Food Lab, and it's specifically designed to study Nordic food, true, but it's inspiring people all over the world, including myself, because of the way they're approaching it. They don't create new dishes. What they are doing is developing the building blocks of understanding that will allow all of us cooks to make better food and more delicious food. So they're studying wild foods, they're cataloging things, they're discovering the characteristics of 100 different kinds of wild onions and seaweed. They're fermenting native grains and fish. And they're building a platform on which us, as cooks, we can stand and pull ourselves up and make better food and more delicious food. And they're doing it in balance with the whole ecosystem. So basically, they're using a lot of byproduct, a lot of waste product, a lot of things that people would normally throw away. So there's a strong ecological and sustainability content to it as well. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Lars Williams and Mark Emil Hernandez. Hermansen, can we please have a lot? Come on.
Thank you, guys. It's an honor to be here. I think almost everyone who's ever inspired me in the world is in this room today. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Daniel, for the introduction. It's a little difficult to talk about the Nordic Food Lab. A lot of my colleagues really often ask, what is it that you guys actually do? Because it's a little hard to understand. And it doesn't make it any easier for chefs to understand when I say, well, our anthropologist, Mark, who's standing next to me, is really working on this big project that we just started, and it becomes more and more complicated. I think to start off, you guys are getting bags. It's not exactly a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. If you could take this vial out first, you can just open it, taste it, please. We'll get back to what it actually is, and I think it makes more sense to explain what we do, our approach to food, and our ideology if I let Mark sort of tell about this in his roundabout way.
All right, good to see you all. So title of our talk, Delineating the Edible and the Inedible, Challenging Concepts to Shape the Future. I mean, we always use these really fancy titles for our work. We really enjoy putting that on top of the food. But basically, this is Lars and I and a few other people staffed on the boat, flavor scientists, a historian, ethnobotanist that kind of go into this to develop, new methods, new techniques, and really, really new building blocks.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna start this by just telling my own story briefly. It started 1 year ago at Oxford University as I was standing here, just finishing my final paper with the title, An Anthropological Perspective on New Nordic Cuisine as an Expression of Nordic Identity, which is a very complicated title, again, to express a very simple idea, which is we are what we eat, or something by the likes of that. As I was standing here, about to open that bottle of champagne, surrounded by almost three girls, this idea came to my mind. Yeah. This idea came to my mind. Why don't I take this paper with this fancy title and send it to Rene Redzepi at Noma, and let kind of the new Nordic, Oxford, all these fancy words work its magic, and maybe he'll chip in a free dinner. What happened next was I found myself on a fucking cold winter day with a sauce net fishing for seaweed hoppers in the Copenhagen harbour. Because what Rene did was to pose me a challenge. He said, what does it mean that something is inedible? Why is it that I can't just go out and take everything that I find on my way and put it on the plate in my restaurant? And I said, that's a great question. I mean, humans being essentially omnivores, we've heard this all day, can eat most things. This guy here made a whole career out of doing just that. Sorry.
It's okay.
They put everything they find on their way and put it in their mouth, and it's a way to explore the world.
Which I think is it's something that we need to get back to. As children, babies, it's amazing to watch them. They're constantly interacting and exploring the world. And we really like to take inspiration from that. And that's how we try and approach things, is by unlearning almost everything that we did know in the beginning. And for us to work creatively, it's all about finding this line, this boundary that you have against your inspiration and stepping over it. So the most difficult thing for us to do is figure out what we don't know, in a sense.
Yeah, so exactly. But what we found was there's of course a border between the edible and inedible, and most times it's just edible. The inedible is just an edible with a consequence. And of course, consequences can
everyone
be...
knows that all mushrooms are edible, just some of them have consequences.
But there are also social and cultural consequences of eating some things.
Yeah. Earlier the guys from Mission Street talked about that, and this sort of complexity about what is the identity that food has.
Exactly. Just to sum up, we need to develop some of these kind of intellectual tools for the kitchen that we can then work to apply in kind of innovating food, as we say. And okay, so to come back with it, so as I'm sure you're all aware here, 20 minutes before lunch, or 15 minutes now, eating is a biological act. It's something we need to do. But to quote the great anthropologist Claude Fischler, eating is so much more than that. Food is a substance that we allow to cross the boundary between the outside and the inside side of our body. And this principle of incorporation, as he calls it, touches upon the very nature of our person. It tells us something about who we are and where we are and about the people that we surround us with. People eating similar food, we trust. People eating dissimilar foods, we distrust, or we might even be disgusted by them. And what we do through these regional cuisines is establish a set of meanings around different foodstuffs, and it kind of allows us to imagine who we are and where we are in the world. So you kind of develop. So what you have these cultural concepts of what is and what is not delicious, and these concepts are like stamps that sticks to you through your life, and through generations as well. Like in Lars's family, where they still celebrate a traditional Christmas dinner every single year in New York, 3 generations after they left the continent.
Yeah, we don't really speak Norwegian, but
no, exactly.
We still have a big sort of Norwegian-style spread. And you see that in New York is a great place to witness that, where you have Italian Americans who are so proud of their culinary heritage and don't speak Italian.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's kind of this rule of deliciousness or edibility that's kind of delivered between people and between generations. And those concepts can change too. We found this great story of a riot in Boston in the 18th century, where the prisoners were writing that they were being fed so much lobster. It was so disgusting to them. It's basically what they were eating before they had rats.
So there was actually a mandate, so there was actually a law written where they had a maximum amount of lobster that could be served, which is not a problem that we generally have today.
But say even seaweed or wild herbs, 10 years ago in this region was considered an inedible substance, or something that you just would not eat. It wasn't considered delicious at all, at least in a general level. So not only when it becomes meaningful to consume something, that it has the possibility of becoming delicious. oh, I'm forgetting my slides here. These are bull's testicles from Colorado that they fry up and sell them as Rocky Mountain oysters.
Sure do.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to say that these are really kind of really powerful concepts. So last year, just to repeat what Lars said, that when we do this, it becomes an introspective journey because we're really trying to challenge our own ideas and perceptions of where this borderline is. So last year at MAD, Alex Atala presented some of us and some of you with these ants from the Amazon. Tasted just like lemongrass, absolutely amazing, and made us think. These things are amazingly delicious, yet they are inedible. This is a really disgusting animal, but this is so delicious that this is something I want more of. And it made us realize that what we kept on assuming was that edibility is a concept that is somehow perceived as prior to deliciousness. So for us, if we just kind of reverse that and say deliciousness is the driving force for edibility, we kind of get this great concept, or this great tool, where we can take this isolated concept of deliciousness and then just apply it in the kitchen. And try to innovate and move forward this regional cuisine. And I could go on debating this all night. I should probably have stayed at university if I wanted to do that. We went to the kitchen instead, and with this hypothesis, the delineation between the edible and inedible is deliciousness itself. And I know it says Lars and Mark on here. In fact, I came up with this myself. Yeah. So I guess
Lars has bigger arms.
we wanted to, I guess what we wanted to do, take this into the kitchen, test it, see, is this true? And actually, we turned to insects as the first stop and say, how do we consider these things? And we consider them like this, from the film Starship Troopers, one of Lars's favorites. These giant, creatures taking over the planet, sucking our brains out with a giant stick, absolutely dangerous and disgusting and everything. Yet 70% of people on the planet eat these things. There's nothing innately wrong about insects. It's just we don't happen to eat them. We find all these kind of small examples in Western culture, like this from the Bible, or stories of homeless guys telling you how you can eat earthworms, things like that. But other than that, there's not a lot of things. Then you have all these people coming up to us telling this is like the most sustainable food source ever. You have a feed conversion ratio up to 10 times higher than traditional livestock. It tastes great. It basically
Mark.
The way it's used in the Western world is as a gimmick. It's as a culinary joke. When Lars made go back. I'm missing a slide. Okay. When Lars made a butter of grubs that we put on Twitter, and people just freaked out completely. We had the picture of the whole grubs and then the butter, and it was just worms, slime next to each other. It tasted great, by the way. So we started teaming up with some entomologists from the Copenhagen University and the University in Wageningen, where they're actually doing a lot of work on trying to make insects acceptable in the West. And one of them, a lot of the stuff they're doing is to try to extract protein from insects to kind of apply it and make it look like meat. Or as one suggested, even half jokingly, is that if we want to introduce entomophagy, the practice of eating insects in the West, we should all be eating Cambodian food. And I think it really highlights the point here is that why do we have to take all these cultural attributes and then apply that when developing cuisine? Why can't we just make the whole thing up, build a new culinary taxonomy in these creatures, and really kind of map out the taste system of these guys? And this is where the chefs come in here, symbolized by Lars, who insisted I use this image of him. And the chefs can then go in and take all this talk and actually apply this and develop this deliciousness, because we know that the only thing that can make these things taste bad is prejudice itself. And this is when I tell you that the first sauce you had is a garum, a sort of fish sauce that Lars made, only it was from fermented grasshoppers and waxmouth larvae.
So you could also tell probably the people who have been following us, they're a little more hesitant to taste things that we give you.
Exactly. You want this?
Yeah. So you can open up the second vial. It has the one, basically, the ones with these, which are ants that Mark and Ulla and one of our new interns has helped us. We sort of dug these up. And the reason that we started playing with them is because we find them extremely delicious. And that's one of the ideas that we're working. And although I'm doing this as quite a gimmick at the moment, we are fascinated by the flavors and how each one of the different flavors really, each one of the different ants tastes quite different. So this is the sauce that they're actually in. This is us making them. We've just spun the grubs through the centrifuge. And when we're eating these ants, it was amazing how much different each one tasted. Some are lemongrassy, some are coriander. Miles Irving called me up a couple weeks ago and was so excited on the phone, almost couldn't, like panicking exciting, and because he had found coriander flavored ants and immediately put them into a box and shipped them to me. Unfortunately, they escaped somewhere in customs. So we didn't actually get to taste those, but we did find some similar ones in our forest in Copenhagen. But one of the things I think that we're talking about, and one of the reasons that we have people like Mark on our team, is because it allows us to attack these culinary problems and answer questions that myself as a cook am just not educated enough to do. So I sort of found a paper listing what the pheromones that ants use to communicate are, and trying to figure out why they taste like they do. And Ariel Johnson, who's pictured, she's sitting right over there, pictured holding up this whole list of compounds, and she walks by and goes, "Oh, that one's lemongrass. Oh, that one's what the primary compounds of mint." That's there. They're sort of showing off. In ants, this one is lavender, fir, pine, melon, wintergreen, nuts. These are all flavors that the ants have. This is cabbage, roast beef, coconut, coriander, and leather. So for us to be able to use insects as flavorings is amazing. And this is something we're trying to approach food in a slightly different way. And we look at insects and we look at why they have these flavors. It's mostly for defensive purposes. And in the same way, got that guy. Like the same way that thyme tastes good, or tarragon, or rosemary is so flavorful and we love using it in cooking, it's because it's actually a defense mechanism. So we started looking into all the different possibilities that we can possibly use these for. But and the idea is to not have it as a gimmick, to not have it just be this terrible, terrible thing that we're all terribly afraid of. You can try, there's a small beaker with a couple of these guys in it. You can give that a taste now. It's a small white. There should be a third one. Give that a taste. Again, we're going to push everyone's comfort zone a little bit. It's light, it's got a nice sort of fattiness into it, slightly sweet. These are bee larvae, the male drones. Sorry, guys.
We actually get these from Copenhagen. We collect them from a beekeeper who has beehives around the city on rooftops, and they used to just throw them to the chicken to feed the chicken, but
yeah, so now we're finding a very interesting and I think possibly we're taking what used to be a waste product and finding a really positive, creative.
I think someone is actually being attacked by ants.
Oh god, are they fighting back? I think they're getting hyped up by the movie. But so I think the biggest thing that we'd like to talk about is just finding this border between the edible and inedible is how we're trying to interact with our landscape. And it's something that we find passionate, but it's also an idea that we find can be taken anywhere. It's any part of the world. I think can start looking at different parts of their cuisine and finding inspiration from it. And I guess, would like to just pose a challenge to you guys, if you can do the same. Thank you very much.
get to the questions, I just wanted to say just a couple of words about people like Lars and Mark, because I know they've got a professional life working at Noma and the Nordic Food Lab, but they've been running around the back organizing stuff for the last few days. And if you didn't know they had another life, you'd think they were professional event organizers. And they're doing an absolutely brilliant job. And it's not just Lars and Mark. Maybe it's a good time for us to take a moment and to think about the kind of event that Rene and his team have created here, because I think you've all noticed that from the moment we've got off the boat and we've been greeted by volunteers and to the amazing kind of collaborative and collegiate effort that the effort that's been put in, and the joy with which people with their t-shirts from MAD are putting into this event. I just think it's we've all been to events and they're quite interesting and they're sometimes very stimulating, but I don't think any have that kind of feeling of joy and togetherness. It's like a family gathering. So I think what we should do is, for all of the people from Rene down to the volunteers, all the MAD people, all the Noma people, let's make a lot of noise for them. Let's stand up. Let's stand up. Stand up.
Okay.
No, I think it's really important to do that, because I think the atmosphere you guys have created, and girls, has been just absolutely memorable, as Paul Rosen would say. Right, have we got any questions specifically? We do have a question from Paul. Can you just hang on till the microphone gets here?
I think when we started thinking about this presentation, one of the problems that we had was not quoting Paul 15 times.
Copying the whole thing.
Well, I thought that was wonderful. I loved your food. I work in disgust, as you know, and one of the issues is that getting people to do something once is the big problem. That is to say, people get used to things. For example, everyone in this room is breathing the air that came out of the lungs of the person right next to them. Now that's pretty disgusting, but you get used to it. You get used to it. And after a few insects, it's just like some more food. So a critical thing in this, and one area I work in, which is getting people to drink reprocessed sewer water, which is perfectly good water, is to just get them to do it a few times. Because once you do it and if it tastes good, you sort of forget where it comes from, just as we tend to forget where most of our food comes from. We don't think about it, we eat it and enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that we personally noticed, is that I think within 5 days, our sort of acceptance threshold had really changed completely with regard to the insects. And, now we have people coming in to visit us, and you're just sitting there like snacking insects.
First thing Rene did for me, even before I came my first day at the Food Lab, was ordering 10 packets of live grasshoppers and saying, oh, you can pick them up on Monday at 9 o'clock. And I was like, well, what am I going to do? Are they frozen? No, they're alive. Just come and pick them up. So I had these 10 packs of live insects that I just had to go home and start cooking with. And that going through that whole process, inviting people over and all that.
Unfortunately for your girlfriend.
Yeah, exactly.
But not.
Yeah. What I was losing the point here. We have Mikael Bomfrost, who is our director at the Nordic Food Lab, who talks a lot about that. And one of the things we want to do in developing this kind of culinary taxonomy is to actually test that as well. How much do we need to disguise? Do we have, the seaweed hovers. Hovers are actually a great example of that, which is an amphipod, which is kind of in between of a crustacean and an insect. So we thought we could maybe use that as kind of a gateway insect, because it's kind of living right on if you see, crustaceans are basically giant sea creatures, right? So like a lobster, it's a giant sea creature, it's a scavenger, it eats garbage. If not garbage, then other lobsters. And it's a really disgusting animal if it had been living on land, but because it's kind of across that boundary, and probably because we don't see it, I find delicious. Yes, you have these giant insects that only eat leafy matter in the forest all day, and people are disgusting disgusted by it. So I think it's a really good point that Mr. Rosen has in that regard. So I mean, I'm just trying to say this is part of the project we're trying to do, is to map that out. Michael always says it's an interplay between neophobia and neophilia, how something new can be both exciting and scary, and that's really where we, in our, I guess, design process of these things, we really want to hit that spot right now.
Yeah.
And it's
And also for us, I mean, because I think the purpose of what the Nordic Food Lab is to do is to give chefs building blocks that they can really then take their creativity and expand on and form new dishes, new ideas about food. So with the Insight Project, we're trying to give them sort of like a head start, like a little jump kick.
Sorry, Lars, to
Go
interrupt.
ahead.
Just to add to that, I mean, I think that's why it's so interesting working with high-end cuisine, is because people, once they're inside the restaurant, they are much more open to that challenge. So you see at Noma, for instance, or other places where as soon as you go in there, you trust the people around you. You are susceptible to this. We like to do the comparison with Formula One cars. I mean, people don't drive around in Formula One cars except it's despite the fact that it's the kind of best and fastest car around. Yet, some things from the Formula One cars spill down into regular vehicles, and that's kind of that trickle-down effect in terms of developing this that we are also looking for on a kind of a wider, ambitious scale, I guess.
Okay, let's take a question up here, and then I think there's going to be one right here in the middle after that.
I wanted to ask about the cultural impact of the things you eat, because there are cultures where you eat dog, the French eat horse, and specifically the one that probably interests me most is because we see a very big debate about it is whale meat. What would your take on that be? Because the Japanese argue that's a cultural thing. Australians are mightily offended by it and spend a lot of time fighting in the International Whaling Commission. Are there boundaries, cultural boundaries, you don't go across in what you eat?
Well, I mean, I personally don't feel that there's a cultural boundary. I think that when you're talking about whales, it's just not a sustainability problem. And I think that we are in real danger of losing diversity in what we have in the world. And so I think it's just, I don't support whaling myself, but I don't have a problem with it per se as a food, like the idea of it as for food.
I can actually, just to give an example of a big problem we had, because when I tasted this ant first, I was blown away. It was a eureka moment, because in the cold north, I don't expect lemongrass flavors. We're this proud Protestant country that will eat, to survive, and suddenly you were having this flavor here, something that I had in Thai food or in Latin flavors. I was blown away. It was a way of finding new flavors to the food. So we started introducing it gently to some people, and of course a journalist picked up on it and wrote about it, and which resulted in a cascade of angry emails proclaiming that now, it is declared that Noma is the emperor's new clothes. And there was made a short sort of story on how they were envisioning the chefs putting an ant on some of the food, and then everybody was sort of
Laughing behind the scenes.
looking at the guests, and when they put them in the mouth, they would say, "Oh my God, they eat them." So we have that. There is huge cultural boundaries there, even though that it's a delicious flavor. It's a real strong, delicious flavor. But even now, 6 months in it, people have heard about it, and it's becoming more and more common to do it, even amongst us Danes.
Right, but with the ants, we have a sustainability problem with the ants, is that we can't, with that's a good example for the whaling, because if we consume all these ants, then they'll be gone and not be around for people to enjoy. So we're quite careful about how we forage for wild things. And that's something to take in consideration with you're just foraging wild herbs as well. So.
Yeah, and in fact, that's one of the things that the entomologists highlight all the time, is that if we want to kind of roll this out on a wider scale, it's very important to do it in a strategic manner, where we are kind of have those problems covered from the beginning, finding out what are the danger zones, not only health-wise, but also in terms of the environment and sustainable kind of cultures for the ants, things like that, to not kind of go into it. Yeah.
We've got a question here, right in the middle, right there, in the middle.
I was just wondering if you guys had ever thought about presenting the insects perhaps to children first, and if you had, because they have less preconceived notions. I have a child that eats grasshoppers coated in dusted cheddar. He's kind of weird, but I was just wondering if you see a difference in the acceptance of insects from adults in comparison to children?
Yes. I mean, kids, if that's you find it's completely different. Kids are very, very willing to accept novel foods because they don't have the cultural sort of stigma against it. We were down in Amsterdam talking to entomologists about food, and they'd made meatballs that one had mealworms and one didn't have mealworms. And 90% of the people preferred the ones with the mealworms in them. And then actually a small kid came up and was complaining, like, Mommy, I don't have enough mealworms in my meatball. So there's I think with children it's fantastic, I think in general to interact with kids and food, but for this insect project you definitely see much more of an acceptance level.